Hi, everyone. My name is Ann Diaz, and I'm the head of platform equity strategy at Airbnb. And I am so excited to be moderating this conversation with three absolutely incredible leaders who I feel fortunate to also consider friends. I want to do some quick introductions. This talk is all about how to make your products more fair, inclusive, and equitable. We're going to talk about what all of that means and how you can really bring some very, very concrete ideas back to your own jobs. But first, introductions. I am so pleased to have all of you get to meet Imani Dunbar. She is the head of equity strategy at LinkedIn, where she's responsible for developing, implementing, and delivering on LinkedIn's equity strategy, and ultimately making sure that the company's long-term commitment to help drive equitable outcomes for everyone within the global workforce actually comes to fruition. What you should also know about Imani is that she is just an absolutely incredible, deliberate, and inclusive leader in everything that she does. The first conversation that we had together, she held space for us to figure out things that we had in common. And she's just an absolutely incredible listener, compassionate leader. And I'm excited for you to all hear from her today. Also joining us is Tulsi Doshi. She is the director of and head of product for responsible AI at Google. And in this role, she's really leading the development of Google-wide improvements, resources, and best practices for developing more equitable, safe, and trustworthy products. I think Tulsi is really sort of at the cutting edge of the future of technology and how it works for all of us. And one thing that you should know about Tulsi is that she is just an incredibly calm, collected, cool person under pressure. She is just able to describe really complicated ideas in super, super simple, straightforward ways. And I think you're going to learn a ton from her. Next is Raena Saddler, who is a director of product on the central social impact product team at Meta, where she's leading cross-company work focused on making Meta's products more fair, equitable, and inclusive. She also works on teen well-being. And something that you should know about Raena is that she has an incredible bias towards action. When she has an idea, if there's something that needs to happen in this space, Raena makes it happen. She actually is the one who's responsible for bringing us all together for this panel. And she also actually has brought all of us together in person. We've been able to have dinners together, get together and share some of the things that we're thinking about, and start to talk about best practices sort of from an industry perspective. And that's really all thanks to Raina's leadership. So without further ado, I want to get into kind of the meat of this conversation, which is really, again, all about the idea of equity and inclusion within your products. So let's first level set, though, and make sure that the terminology that we're using is clear and straightforward to all of you, and just making sure that all of you can understand what it is that we say and what we mean when we say those terms. So to get us started, Tulsi and Imani, I want to hand it over to the two of you because I know you've got some really great takes on all of this terminology that we use.
Great. Thanks so much, Anne. Hey, everyone. It is so great to be here and to be chatting with all of you and to be chatting with these three amazing women as well. So like Anne said, we're going to kick off with how do you think about these terms? What are the different words that we use when we try to describe fairness, inclusion, equality, representation? And specifically, we're going to focus on three words that you've probably used when you're thinking about these problem spaces, or that you've heard others use when thinking about success and goals that you're setting in your companies. And so I'll start first by kicking off with one, which is diversity. What do we mean when we say diversity? Well, diversity is really about understanding, celebrating, and honoring the differences across your users and your members. It's really about how do you get a big picture of the different needs, the different approaches, the different mental models that your users might have, and build a product to represent those considerations. So taking a Google example of the Google Pixel, when we think about diversity in the context of the Pixel, we're really thinking about who are the different users who might use this device? What are the different lighting conditions they might be in? What are the different Wi-Fi conditions they might be in? What are the different needs they might have when they're developing a photo or editing it or choosing to share it with a friend or family. And Imani, maybe you want to take what does that mean for a different product?
Yeah, thanks. I also want to thank Anne for that phenomenal introduction and want to welcome all of you to this panel. Thank you for taking time out of your lives and day to spend time with us. And I hope all is well, given the various circumstances I know we all face. I'd say, in addition to what Tulsi mentioned, I think from a diversity perspective, this is a very, very vast and comprehensive word. So I'm going to give you another example of how to think about diversity, which is anytime you're using our products, LinkedIn, Google, Meta, for example, we account for multiple languages, right? So the fact that not everyone speaks the exact same language is something that we account for because that is unique and very specific to each of our members and each of our users. So again, just kind of examples we'll provide from both the Google and LinkedIn perspective to help cement some of these terms. But just another quick example for this take on diversity and what it can mean.
And I think it's also, this goes back, and the examples you're going to see are going to reference the idea that while these terms have a meaning, in the case of diversity, really understanding the needs of a diversity of individuals, there's also not a one size fits all way that they apply. And so whether you're talking about LinkedIn, Meta, or Google, you're going to have to interpret this term in the context of your own product and in the context of your own circumstance, right? So let's take another example. Equality. Equality is different than diversity in that it really focuses on how are you treating each member or user of your product. And equality is really about treating every person the same. So in the context, again, of the Pixel, that would mean really thinking about providing the same features for everyone. So every camera should have the red eye reduction, right? And it should make sure that it works for every user in that very specific context for that very specific feature.
And I'll take another example from a LinkedIn perspective. And I'll take it in the context of, let's say someone was going to do a LinkedIn search, either as just a member or perhaps a recruiter specifically looking to hire an individual. Using the language example again, acknowledging that some languages are gender specific. So in some languages, you may say fireman, policeman. In some languages, words have female versus male versus other gender kind of descriptions. So everyone should have the ability to search for what it is they need and how they reflect it in their daily terms and in their daily ways of working. So an example of equality, everyone should have access to these features, the same features, the ability to search, and they should also have the ability to search it by the relevant language that they speak.
And I think then that leads into this third term, which is one that I think we also use in a very different context, which is equity. And so while equality refers to these ideas of the red eye reduction on Pixel or being able to search in the language that you speak and understand, equity is really about understanding a much deeper level of the historic and systemic barriers that have existed for members and users, and actually building to account for those understandings, right? So while equality on the Pixel means understanding and building features that everyone can access, equity is about recognizing that for some users, especially across a diversity of skin tones, existing lighting conditions, existing features may actually just not work as well. And building the same feature for every skin tone will actually mean that that feature doesn't work for some subset of skin tones. And so it's really about the equity piece here is about recognizing that we need to actually develop uniquely for a certain set of users and actually uniquely build for their set of needs, which might actually mean building a new feature, right? Or building new effects on top of a feature to make it really work.
So on the LinkedIn side, using that same example of everyone having the ability to search for results, the reality is that when you return those results, whether or not someone put in policeman, policewoman, fireman, it should return results back neutral of gender. So in fact, no matter what you type in, the results you should then see are for police officers or are for firefighters. In fact, when you go into our recruiter product, which is a little bit different from the member facing product, we've done work to actually automate that word search. So even if you put in policeman or fireman, we'll actually help you default to police officer and firefighter. So again, acknowledging that particularly for certain, in this case, genders, regardless of what you are looking for, it should be based on skill set and experience. And that is the result of equity coming through from a search result perspective on LinkedIn. Now, hopefully we've given you a little bit of examples of the terminology we're going to be using and some practical applications of them. These are only a few. There are millions more out there, but hopefully we've provided a bit more clarity for you all.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I love what really came through in those examples, I think, is how these concepts of diversity, equality, and equity actually lead to innovation in product. It's not these aren't concepts that stop you from building new products and features. They're actually concepts that enable you to make your products better. And so obviously I'm a little bit biased, but it all seems very clear to me why you would want to do this. But I know that that's not always the case even within our own businesses. And so, Raena, I want to hand it to you to really talk about how you think about building this business case for product equity and inclusion and really bring your stakeholders along with you.
Yes, happy to speak to that. And also just thank you for hosting this wonderful panel. You all are in the audience, lucky to see these are three of my favorite women, not just, at this conference, but just in the industry. So it's great to all be together and share space with you all. I think actually we've done a really solid job building a strong business case for fairness, equity, and inclusion on our products, not just at Meta, but across all four of our companies, which is why you've probably all seen articles about how companies are tightening their belts in this economy. In some cases, responsibility or DEI related work can be one of the first things to go. But what you're seeing with our companies and so many of our partners is a continuing commitment to build responsibly and build products in a new way. And so that's something I'm actually really proud of, and we'll love for you all watching to bring this to your companies as well. One of the main questions we do get is, how can we actually make the case for this? So our teams at Meta have approached this with two audiences. We think about execs as one audience and then product teams as another. So with executives, what's worked is landing that this isn't like nice to have DEI related work. It's actually critical to the business. At Meta, we know that we're really committed to building innovative products that create value and opportunity for everyone. So we've landed with execs that you can't actually build innovative products and create value and opportunity for everyone if you're not building with equity and inclusion in mind. We, as Imani mentioned, we have global products. We reach, billions of people around the world, and many of those people speak different languages, come from different backgrounds, and we have to actually build quality experiences that work for a variety of people. And you can't do that if you're not building with intentionality around your target users. We've also landed that user expectations are changing. Competitors are investing here and raising the bar. Our companies up here are investing. We have a lot of partners that we work with: Uber, Snap, Pinterest, Adobe. They're all working on building more inclusive and fair experiences. And users want this. Everybody wants to feel seen and designed for by the tech industry. So companies who want to stay innovative and want to stay relevant are going to need to bake this into how they're actually building their products. So that's how we think about the exec side. And then on the product side, with all of you watching, what's worked for us is demystifying the work and making it achievable. I think, we started with language because a lot of times these terms and conversations around these terms can be really intimidating to people, and nobody wants to get it wrong. So as PMs, we're all here to find product market fit with our users. Whenever I'm talking to PMs or product teams, I try to sell this in as, this is just finding product market fit, but specifically for underrepresented and historically marginalized users as well. So it's making sure that, as you have who you have product market fit for, thinking about who isn't represented in our goals, who isn't achieving our goals at the same rate. For example, are women and men experiencing this product in the same way? Or is our product working better from some audiences than others? We'll get into how a little later into this panel, but I do just want to give you all as PMs the confidence that product market fit is something we're all already good at. So as long as you're just bringing some intentionality into who you're building for and build solutions with those groups in mind, we can actually create more equitable products together.
Yeah, I love that. I think something that I've talked to a number of product leaders at our company about too is this concept of almost like funnel optimization. We want as many people as possible to be able to use our products. And what we can start to do is understand where are some groups of people sort of falling through the funnel. Where's our funnel leaking? And then we should really think about what are the features and tools that we can build that are going to make sure that everyone who starts out at the beginning sort of gets through to this successful, really wonderful end state that we're working towards. Imani, I'm curious to hear a little bit about sort of the way that you think about this as well at LinkedIn, and kind of from a maturity perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think what will hopefully be helpful for this audience is kind of a delineation between what to think through, given where your company and team are on the maturity kind of life cycle, so to speak. And so I love the breakout that you gave, Raena, between like product and then kind of executive and setting goals and having strategies for each of those kind of constituents. Um, I'm going to kind of give it three kind of very broad buckets. It's not drawn to scale, but kind of less mature, more mature, and like most mature. If you're a less mature company, let's say that you are just starting out on this, a couple of things that I think could be helpful to think through. Finding a sponsor, right? And I think the more kind of senior the sponsor is, the better. Leverage what's already available. And there's tremendous amounts of research that have been done around, what our population in the US and in other parts of the world are going to look like in 10 years. So like get to know kind of the total addressable market, not just as it is, but as it's developing, because that really puts you kind of, future forward and thinking. I'd say start to understand your data. And then also start the journey, right? You've got to start to acquire the knowledge. You've got to start to acquire the expertise that you're going to need to actually advance this work. So start thinking through those things and start leaning into it. And then the last thing, and you're going to hear this on each of the three that I mentioned, set goals. And given where you are, like set goals that are somewhere between pragmatic and ambitious. That's how we try and think about kind of goal setting here at LinkedIn, like pragmatism and ambition. Like there's a common sweet spot for that, but set goals. If you're maybe a more mature in your company's equity journey, I say start to consider like what types of public commitments are you making? What types of internal commitments are you starting to make? I think we all have an appreciation for this notion of like sharing. There's kind of this example of, if you want to have a better kind of workout routine or regimen, then you tell someone, and then you have like an accountability buddy. The same kind of applies here, right? Which is start to share what your commitments are. Start to engage with, external parties. You all have probably partnership teams. You have peer companies that you actually work with. So maybe start to engage with some of those. Start to think about some of the change management that's going to happen. I don't want to shortchange the fact that if we are embarking on something that is relatively nascent, like equity and building kind of products with equity mindset, that's going to take a change management kind of focus, right? So what are you going to do to kind of implement this change more broadly throughout your company? Because at the end of the day, this shouldn't come down to a single team. This should be your entire company, or it should be the work of your entire company. And then last, of course, set goals. And then the last thing I'll say is kind of maybe for some of the more mature models, make sure that you're setting like long-term goals, right? So you should be at a point where you're setting 3-year commitments and 3-year goals that you can hold yourself to. Start giving thought to how do you tie the goals to actual performance, to active as an incentive for people who should be doing this work. That could be anything from compensation to promotion readiness and overall growth, right? How do you actually integrate these into your daily operating practices? So a couple tips on how to think of moving this work forward and bringing others along, but also acknowledging where you are in the development life cycle, because the tactics can be different.
Great. Tulsi, do you want to add anything to what Raena and Imani already shared?
Raena and Imani both, I think, hit really clearly on how do you think about building the case and actually building the work program to build out product inclusion and equity efforts at your company. And I would say, echoing a point I made when we were talking about definitions, there isn't a single way to do this, nor is there a single right answer for the business case you're developing either, right? Depending on the executive you're talking to, depending on the product team you're talking to, depending on the life stage that a particular product is in, even in a more mature company, you might find yourself making a different business case, right? So for example, as we're now exploring generative AI, and I can talk a little bit more about this a little bit later, we are realizing that the business case and the maturity of that space of technology is much newer than the examples I was giving earlier with the Pixel, for example. And so the way we think about setting goals, the way we think about working with our execs on product inclusion priorities, the way users are expecting from us product inclusion efforts and how the product should work for them is going to differ. And so don't feel the pressure also to only define one definition of success for your product or for product inclusion and equity in your product. Identify where the mental models of your company is, what success looks like at your company, and then try to situate product inclusion and equity in that notion of success and kind of building from there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think, we're starting to get a little bit into brass tacks now, how you actually bring this into practice within your companies. And, there really are three main practices that I think all of us share at our companies. The first is thinking about inclusive research and design, making sure that these principles are really a part of those organizations and the kind of data and ultimately what you're doing with that data to build new products. Measurement. Imani talked about this. How are you thinking about disaggregating metrics? What really matters for your company and how you're sort of goaling against those metrics and making sure that inclusive principles are really a part of what your company is paying attention to. And then lastly, on the engineering side, thinking about making sure that all of the systems that you're building, particularly machine learning models, as you're starting to incorporate AI, how are you considering fairness and making sure that you're not inadvertently replicating biases from the outside world into those systems that are sort of running in the background that we can kind of forget about? So I want to actually dive into some real case-based examples with each of you. Imani, can you start us off talking about sort of how you more tactically have incorporated these principles into LinkedIn?
Yeah, sure. Glad to kick us off. And I think the one example I'll probably give is around kind of this notion of just kind of commitments and holding yourselves accountable, but also generically data collection, because before you can do any measurement or set any goals, you have to have the data for it. But a couple things we've done at LinkedIn. Like one, we've made it a point to publish kind of updates on our commitment to equity, and we do it very publicly. We try and kind of refresh that every kind of 12 to 18 months to give an update on what progress we've made against what we set out to do, and kind of give previews as to where we're looking, normally in the form of a company blog post. And then the other kind of example I'll give is we relaunched our self-ID process some time ago. And what self-ID is basically you can go into everyone on this call, please do it if you haven't already. You can go into your settings and actually there's 11 different kind of demographics by which we ask people to self-identify. And that data is important because it actually powers a lot of work around things like understanding the different product experiences various demographics are having on our platform. And we also want to make sure that we're using that data we collect to kind of add value and give back. Super excited to report less than 6 months ago, we published the first ever workforce trends report based on demographic data. And this was very much centered around the impact of remote work, particularly on people of color, particularly on women and women identifying people of color. Which again is kind of, we've got to do something with the information. In addition to just collecting it, we also have to keep folks updated. So those are a couple of examples I'll give from how we keep folks updated on our commitments, and then how we're leveraging the data to actually help drive insights that can inform a lot of the work that we're already trying to do.
Awesome. I really encourage everyone in the audience to check out that report. Tulsi, I want to hear from you about how this is playing out at Google. In particular, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions and there's a lot of curiosity likely in the audience about BARD and generative AI.
Yeah, I think I really like, Anne, how you laid out at the beginning the three kind of big main practices, right? This idea of inclusive research, measurement, and then how we actually think about the engineering and the building to meet those goals that we set. And I think generative AI is actually no exception to that. And we're seeing that with Bard, even though the space is so new, and even though we're learning about the risks and the limitations and the opportunities and what this technology really can mean for every single user, I think the fundamentals and the foundations actually still hold true. And that's been really interesting to see as we're building this new technology, right? Ultimately, we want to get to this place where we're building for inclusion as a default for every generative AI product we're building. And so what we're going through right now is, what is the best practice here? And what does it really mean to build a product like Bard with every user in mind, right? And so we started with doing a risk assessment of what do we think the biggest failure modes are for different users for a product like Bard. And then, as Imani said, establishing goals, right? So really establishing goals around each one of these risks. So for example, whether it is hateful or harmful content and the likelihood of generating that kind of content, or whether it's about stereotypes related to gender, for example, setting goals around these risks such that we can then measure them, and then also actually just iteratively improve the model to generate more nuanced, more safe, more inclusive answers. And then I think a big part of this is also bringing in feedback and really making sure that we're bringing in a diversity of feedback from experts, from stakeholders, nonprofits, civil human rights stakeholders, for example, and building in flows, whether that's just even something as simple as a thumbs up, thumbs down, to be able to get that feedback. And I think that, to me, is one of the key takeaways, is establish that continuous approach, especially if it's for a technology that is so new, like generative AI. We're also learning how users are going to use this technology and how our users might find value in that technology, where they might run into challenges with the technology. And when you're getting this feedback, really be intentional about making sure that you're not caught in the averages of the feedback, right? I think one trap that we often fall into is looking at the feedback that we get from users as kind of just a set of numbers. But the reality is, different users who try different types of prompts, or who have different types of experiences, who come from different types of expertise, will likely run into very different challenges. And those challenges can average out if we're not careful to actually slice into them and really peel apart where the differences in the experiences are. And that's what we're finding we need to do with a product like Bard, is really dive into the types of failures, the loss patterns, the examples where the product isn't working as well, and where the product is working really well, to try and make sure that we're training the model and learning from that feedback appropriately. Because it's hard to improve what you can't measure and what you can't see. And so I think that's a big thing. One last thing I'll say before handing it off to Raena to talk about Meta is, one big thing we're realizing with generative AI is how important it is to lower the barrier to entry for folks to start thinking about product inclusion and equity. And so one of the things that we're doing with Bard is, every learning that we have, every time we see a type of way to measure or improve a particular challenge, we're trying to codify that into tools and platforms that we can then use for every single one of our generative AI products. Because what we're finding is that there's a lot of intimidation to define what a product inclusion or equity problem means. But once we can help a team define what that means, there are so many smart, motivated, talented people who will come up with creative ways to improve and innovate in the space. And it's really about finding that initial jumping off point. And so that's something I would also think about as you're thinking about your own product and your own company, is what are the ways you can help people enter the conversation? What are initial findings, definitions, insights you can provide that give people a jumping off point, at which point the creativity can flow and more, awesome ideas that you may not have even thought of will kind of come from there.
Yeah, I appreciate that you brought up this concept of, in multiple places, learning from what you're doing and making things better. And Raena, I think you have some great examples of Meta doing that when it comes to like COVID-19 equity response. Can you share a little bit more about the work that you worked on there?
Sure, I'm happy to. I'll try to quickly share this example. I like to use COVID because it's something we all lived through and understand, and also because we have a blog post about it that UPNs can look up after this. But The main problem that we were trying to solve was that, in the US in the early days, not all communities could access the vaccine, and also not all communities wanted to. Black, Latinx, and Native communities in particular were facing the steepest health access challenges. They were facing, access to credible information about the vaccines and also access to the vaccine itself challenges. And so we use a framework at Meta called, developed by Naomi Glate, our VP of product, called Understand, Identify, Execute. So using some of the best practices that Anne shared earlier for the understand part, we dove deep on inclusive research, talking with users in the communities, doing literature reviews, talking to experts like Kaiser Family Foundation, health equity experts to understand which communities should we prioritize and what problems should we try to solve. And we landed on our COVID equity work focusing on communities with lower access to vaccines, which included Black, Latinx, and Native communities, to support them to make sure they're getting trusted information about the vaccine and where to access it. As Anne mentioned, iteration is really important. If you used any Facebook products during the time of the elections, you get lots of upsells to register to vote. During COVID, it was information about the vaccines and where to access it. For this, we measured, okay, well, how are these reaching the people in the target audiences that we want to be making sure see this information, who are facing the access challenges? And we measured, and we found that we actually weren't reaching all of our target communities equally. And so because of this information and doing the metrics disaggregation that Anne mentioned and Tulsi mentioned, we knew that access was a core part of our product goal. So we designed a solution that actually solved for this. Another thing that we did is making sure that we were designing solutions with the communities and not for them. And that unlocks really important insights that you wouldn't otherwise know if you're designing with. For example, we knew that while Dr. Fauci was a very credible and convincing medical authority in some communities, not everybody was going to be convinced to get the vaccine because of him. So we knew that from experts, from people in the communities, the most effective intervention for them was going to be seeing trusted content from a person who they trust from their communities. And so then we moved on to execute. We built and shipped. We measured and iterated. What we ended up doing was shipping informational units to show general information about vaccine safety to everyone, but we promoted it because of those access challenges and because of the metrics that we found in not reaching everyone equally. We promoted it more frequently or more prominently to people who are in lower vaccination zip codes. So that's just one example. We apply tactics like that to a variety of products. For example, like creators' content, making sure that's being distributed fairly, looking at some of the AI fairness work that Tulsi and Imani mentioned. Also making sure that as we're thinking about building the metaverse, doing this with equity and inclusion in mind from the very beginning.
I just want to say thank you so much to all three of you for the fantastic examples that you shared today. And I hope that all of you in the audience are coming away from this conversation with a real sense of just the creativity and the innovation that goes into making our products more equitable, more inclusive, and serving a wide, diverse range of people. I am just so honored and humbled to have the opportunity to learn from these three. And I hope that for those of you in the audience, if you were also inspired to start to bring this kind of lens and this language to your work, or perhaps if you're realizing you're already doing this within your own companies, we want you to be more involved. We want you to be a part of this conversation because we really see these concepts of equity and inclusion being the next frontier of product development. You can see on the slide here, there's a URL that you can follow to get more involved and get more connected to the work that we're doing. We want to be one another's accountability partners, and we really want to learn from one another in industry. So looking forward to connecting with all of you, and thank you three so much. I love every opportunity that we have to connect together.
Thank you for hosting us, Anne.
Thanks, Queens.